I never expected to discover my husband's betrayal through a misplaced envelope. After 37 years of marriage, I thought Richard and I had shared every secret between us. I was wrong. That manila envelope, so innocuous at first glance, contained paternity test results for a 32-year-old man named Nathan Parker. My husband's signature confirmed what the 99.9% match already declared. Richard Reynolds had fathered a child with another woman just 5 years into our marriage. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stood frozen in our home office, my reading glasses sliding down. My nose, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Photos of our life together stared back at me from the walls. Our wedding day, the birth of our 2 children, family vacations, college graduations, and suddenly they all seemed like elaborate props in a play where I was the only one who didn't know the real plot. I've always prided myself on my intuition. As a high school counselor for over 30 years, I developed a knack for sensing when teenagers weren't telling the whole truth. Yet somehow, I missed the signs in my own home. Our life in Oak Ridge seemed picture perfect. Richard built Thompson Furniture from a single storefront into a respected regional chain with 3 locations. Our colonial home in Maple Ridge Estates hosted countless holiday gatherings and summer barbecues. Our daughter, Jessica, followed her father into the business after college, while our son Mark became an architect in the city. I devoted my career to helping young people find their paths. We were the family others admired. The day I found that envelope, I'd been searching for our property tax documents in Richard's home office. He was in Chicago at a furniture expo, not due back for 3 days. The envelope was wedged between mortgage statements in the filing cabinet. No attempt to hide it, really. Perhaps after all these years, Richard had grown careless, or maybe he'd simply forgotten its existence. Remember the exact moment my world shifted. I'd opened the envelope expecting insurance paperwork. Instead, I found myself staring at the phrases DNA parentage test and 99.9% probability of paternity. The test was dated 4 months earlier. The mother's name, Diana Parker, meant nothing to me, but the child's birth date stopped my breath. June 15, 1991. The summer Richard spent expanding the business to Pinecrest. The summer I was 7 months pregnant with Mark. I called Jessica first, my fingers trembling so badly I misdialed twice. "Mom? Everything okay?" Her voice was tinged with the concern that only comes when your mother calls unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I lied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just checking when you and Daniel are arriving for the anniversary party next weekend. Friday afternoon, like we planned. Mark and Olivia are coming Thursday night." She paused. "Are you sure you're all right? You sound strange." "Just tired," I assured her. Planning this 40th anniversary party is more work than I expected. After we hung up, I sat motionless in Richard's leather chair, the sun setting outside, while my marriage crumbled in my hands. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I carefully returned the envelope to its exact position, closed the filing cabinet, and walked to the kitchen where I poured myself a glass of Richard's expensive Cabernet. I needed to think clearly. The anniversary party was in 10 days. Our entire family would be gathered at the lake house to celebrate 4 decades of what I'd believed was a faithful marriage. Jessica and Daniel were flying in from Seattle. Mark and Olivia would drive up from the city. Richard's brother Thomas and his wife were coming from Phoenix. Even my 87-year-old mother had booked a flight from Florida, a celebration of our enduring love. The irony tasted more bitter than the wine. I could have called Richard immediately, demanded answers through tears and accusations. That would have been understandable, expected even. But something deeper held me back. A cold, clear voice inside me whispered that knowledge was power, and I'd just discovered I'd been powerless for 30 years without realizing it. The next morning, I called the one person I knew would help me without judgment. Grace Sullivan and I had been friends since college. She'd stood beside me at my wedding and held my hand through both my children's births. She'd divorced Harold 15 years ago after discovering his affair with his dental hygienist. "Meet me at Riverside in 30 minutes," was all I said. Grace was already waiting at our usual corner table when I arrived, 2 lattes steaming, in front of her. "Victoria Reynolds, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said bluntly as I slid into my seat. I placed the envelope, yes, I'd taken it after all, on the table between us. "Richard has a son," I said, my voice hollow even to my own ears. "He's 32 years old." Grace's eyes widened, but to her credit, she said nothing. She simply opened the envelope, reviewed its contents, then folded her reading glasses and set them aside. "What are you going to do?" she asked finally. I traced the rim of my untouched coffee cup. "I don't know yet, but I'm not confronting him right away." Grace raised an eyebrow. "The anniversary party is next weekend." "I know. Vicky." "I need information first," I said firmly. "I need to understand what I'm dealing with before I confront him." Grace studied me for a long moment. "What do you need?" That afternoon, I sat in Grace's sunroom with her laptop open before me. Diana Parker wasn't difficult to find. She owned a small art gallery in Pinecrest, the neighboring town where Richard had opened his second store location in 1991. Her social media showed an attractive woman with silver-streaked dark hair, still slender and elegant at 54. Nathan Parker's profile revealed a young man with Richard's jawline and my son Mark's build. He was a landscape architect with his own design firm in Portland, married to a woman named Claire, with a 3-year-old daughter. I had a grandson I'd never met. I scrolled through years of Nathan's life documented in photos: college graduation, wedding day, his daughter's birth. Moments Richard and I should have shared. Had Richard been there? Had he watched from the shadows as his secret son grew up? That night, alone in our king-sized bed, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not the dramatic sobbing of fresh heartbreak, but the quiet, profound weeping of a woman mourning decades lost to a lie. The next morning, I called Howard Bennett. He'd been our family attorney for 20 years, handling everything from business contracts to our wills. "Victoria," he greeted me warmly. "What can I do for you today?" "I need to meet with you privately," I said. "And Howard, I don't want Richard to know." 3 hours later, I sat in Howard's office downtown, the paternity test between us on his mahogany desk. "I need to know my options," I said simply. Howard removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Legally speaking, you have grounds for divorce based on infidelity. However, given the time that's passed, I'm not talking about divorce." "Not yet," I interrupted. "I need to know where I stand financially if I decide to go that route, what I'm entitled to, what I could lose." Howard nodded slowly. "Richard's business has grown substantially during your marriage. As his wife, you're entitled to a significant portion regardless of your direct involvement. The house, investments, retirement accounts, these are marital assets. And if there have been payments to this woman or her son over the years?" Howard's expression tightened. "That could potentially be considered dissipation of marital assets. It would strengthen your position." I nodded, taking notes in the small leather-bound planner I'd carried for years. "I need you to do something for me, Howard. Discreetly. I need to know if Richard has been making payments to Diana Parker or Nathan Parker. And I need to know if there's any legal documentation regarding this child, support agreements, acknowledgement of paternity before this test." Howard studied me carefully. "Victoria, Are you sure you want to proceed this way? Perhaps a direct conversation with Richard? I've been in the dark for 30 years, I said, my voice steady. Before I confront my husband, I intend to step fully into the light. Over the next 3 days, I became a detective in my own marriage. I reviewed our bank statements going back years, discovering regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize, $2,000 monthly for the past 15 years. Before that, the amounts varied but appeared quarterly. Child support, disguised as business expenses. I found a safety deposit box key I'd never seen before in Richard's desk drawer. When I visited our bank, I discovered the box had been opened 20 years ago. Inside were more documents, college fund statements in Nathan's name, insurance policies, and photographs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A smiling, dark-haired boy on a bicycle, a teenager in a cap and gown, a young man in hiking gear atop a mountain. Each discovery was another crack in the foundation of my marriage, but I remained oddly calm. The initial shock had given way to a cold, clear purpose. I wasn't just gathering information, I was reclaiming my agency. 2 days before Richard was due home, I made my final move. I drove the 40 minutes to Pinecrest and parked across from Diana Parker's gallery. Through the window, I could see her arranging a display, elegant in a simple black dress. The woman who had shared a secret with my husband for 3 decades. I didn't go inside. I wasn't ready for that confrontation. Instead, I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, and made my decision. I wouldn't cancel our anniversary celebration. I wouldn't confront Richard before our family gathered. No, after 30 years in the dark, I would choose the moment when light would finally enter our marriage, and I would make sure everyone was watching when it did. Part 2. The escalation. Richard returned from Chicago on Friday, bringing me a delicate silver bracelet as a gift. I accepted it with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, though he didn't seem to notice. In the 37 years of our marriage, I'd never been much of an actress, but now I found myself delivering an Oscar-worthy performance. "Everything set for next weekend?" he asked, unpacking his suitcase while I sat on the edge of our bed, watching his familiar movements with new eyes. "Almost," I replied. "Jessica and Daniel arrive Friday, Mark and Olivia Thursday." He nodded, hanging up his suit jackets with methodical precision. "Your mother still coming?" "Yes." Thomas called to confirm he and Linda will be there too. Richard smiled, that warm smile that had once made my heart flutter. 40 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. "Where did the time go, Vicky?" I wanted to scream. Where did it go? It went to secret meetings and hidden phone calls. It went to a child I never knew existed. It went to carefully constructed lies. Instead, I said, "It's hard to believe, isn't it?" That night, as Richard slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the years we'd shared. Had it all been a lie? The trips we'd taken, the Christmas mornings, the quiet evenings on our back porch watching fireflies? Had he been thinking of his other family during our children's graduations, our anniversary celebrations? The next morning, Howard called while Richard was at the store. "Victoria," he said quietly, "I have the information you requested." I sat down at the kitchen table, notepad ready. "Go ahead." There is a legal agreement, drawn up 32 years ago by a lawyer in Pinecrest. Richard agreed to monthly payments until the child turned 18, plus college expenses. He waived parental rights, but maintained visitation privileges with Diana Parker's consent. My hand trembled slightly. Visitation? The agreement allowed for contact, though it specifies it would be at the mother's discretion. There's no formal schedule documented. I took a deep breath. And the financial records? Regular payments as you discovered, plus larger sums coinciding with life events. High school graduation, college tuition, what appears to be a wedding gift 4 years ago, and a substantial transfer around the time his daughter was born. His daughter, my granddaughter. There's something else, Howard continued hesitantly. A trust was established 5 years ago. It names Nathan Parker and his descendants as beneficiaries. How much? My voice was barely a whisper. When Howard named the figure, I closed my eyes. It was substantial, nearly a quarter of what I'd believed was our joint estate. Is it legal? I asked. Yes, Howard admitted. Richard used primarily his business assets, which he has more control over. But Victoria... He paused, his voice gentler. There's something else you should know. There's a clause in the trust that activates upon Richard's death, or upon the dissolution of your marriage. What kind of clause? If you divorce him, Nathan receives a significantly larger portion immediately. The implication was clear. Richard had created a financial incentive for me to stay quiet if I ever discovered the truth. After hanging up, I sat motionless at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through windows I'd selected when we renovated 15 years ago. The garden outside was in full spring bloom, the azaleas I'd planted framing our back patio. I'd built a life here, invested decades of love, work, and care. And all along, Richard had been calculating how to protect his secret son if I ever discovered the truth. That evening, when Richard suggested we invite Grace and her new boyfriend to dinner, I agreed with a smile. When he wrapped his arms around me from behind as I chopped vegetables for a salad, I leaned back against his chest as I always had. When he kissed the side of my neck and whispered, "I love you, Vicky," I turned and kissed him back. All the while, my mind was working, planning, calculating. As the week progressed, I threw myself into preparations for our anniversary celebration. I confirmed the catering for Saturday night's formal dinner. I arranged fresh flowers for the key lake house. I picked up my new dress, a sleek navy blue sheath that Grace had helped me select. "Are you sure about this?" Grace asked when she came over Thursday morning to help me pack for the weekend. "You could still confront him privately." I carefully folded Richard's favorite sweater and placed it in the suitcase. "I'm sure." "What about Jessica and Mark? Have you thought about how this will affect them?" I paused, my hands stilling on the soft cashmere. "They deserve to know who their father really is." Grace's expression was troubled. "And what about you, Vicky? What do you deserve?" I met her eyes squarely. "The truth, and the chance to decide my own future with all the facts at hand." That afternoon, I made one final preparation. I drove to a small jewelry store 2 towns over, where no one would recognize me. I selected a simple silver frame, small enough to fit in my evening bag. When I returned home, I carefully inserted one of the photographs from the safety deposit box, Nathan at his college graduation, Richard standing proudly beside him, arms around each other's shoulders. Mark and Olivia arrived Thursday evening, as planned. My son looked so much like his father that my breath caught when he walked through the door. The same strong jaw, the same crinkles around his eyes when he smiled. Now I understood why people had always commented on the resemblance. There was another young man out there who shared those same features. "Mom, you look amazing," Mark said, hugging me tightly. 40 years, huh? Pretty impressive these days." I hugged him back, breathing in the scent of his cologne. "Very impressive," I agreed, meeting Richard's eyes over our son's shoulder. My husband smiled back at me, his expression warm and open, the face I'd trusted for nearly 4 decades. That night, as our house filled with the voices of our family, I sat at my vanity and studied my reflection. At 62, I still recognized myself. Silver-streaked brown hair cut in the same style I'd worn for years, laugh lines around my eyes, the small scar on my chin from a childhood fall. But behind my eyes was someone new, a woman I was just getting to know. A woman who would no longer accept anything less than the complete truth. The next morning, we drove to Cedar Lake in 2 cars. Richard, Mark, Olivia, and me in one. Jessica and Daniel, who had arrived early that morning, following, behind. The lake house had been in Richard's family for generations. We'd spent every summer there when the children were growing up, renovating it slowly over the years until the rustic cabin had transformed into a comfortable weekend home. As we unpacked the cars, Jessica pulled me aside on the porch. "Mom, are you okay? You seem different." I smoothed her hair back from her face, this daughter who had my eyes and her father's determined chin. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just emotional about the anniversary." She studied me carefully. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, right?" For a moment, I almost broke. Almost told her everything right there on the sunlit porch where she'd played. As a child. But the moment passed. "Of course I would," I lied, and hugged her close. That afternoon, as the family settled in, unpacking, catching up, laughing over old stories, I slipped away to the small bedroom Richard and I had claimed as ours years ago. I placed the silver frame in the drawer of my bedside table, where it would wait until tomorrow night's celebration. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, looking out at the lake where my children had learned to swim, where Richard and I had watched countless sunsets from the dock, where our family history was written in every view. Tomorrow, that history would be rewritten forever. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Then Richard appeared in the doorway. "There you are," he said, smiling. "Everything okay?" I nodded, returning his smile with practiced ease. "Just taking a moment. It's all a bit overwhelming." He crossed the room and sat beside me, taking my hand in his. His palm was warm against mine, the familiar calluses on his fingers from years of woodworking rough against my skin. 40 years, he said softly. "Best 40 years of my life, Vicky." I looked into his eyes, the eyes I'd gazed into on our wedding day, the eyes I'd trusted completely, and wondered how many times he'd lied while looking at me exactly like this. "Yes," I said quietly. "Quite something, isn't it?" That night, surrounded by our children and their spouses, my mother, Richard's brother and sister-in-law, I played my part perfectly. I laughed at the right moments, shared fond memories, and raised my glass in toast after toast to our enduring marriage. All the while, I felt myself splitting in two, the Victoria who had existed for 37 years, and the woman I was becoming with each passing hour. Tomorrow night, at our anniversary dinner, those two women would finally merge into one, and nothing would ever be the same again. Part 3. The Turning Point. Saturday morning dawned clear and beautiful, sunlight sparkling on Cedar Lake like scattered diamonds. I woke early, before Richard, and stood at our bedroom window watching a pair of loons glide across the water's surface. Today was the day I'd planned for all week, our 40th anniversary celebration, and the moment when 3 decades of secrets would finally come to light. I felt strangely calm. Richard stirred behind me. "You're up early," he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. "Just enjoying the quiet," I replied, not turning around. He came to stand behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist as he'd done countless mornings before. I allowed myself to lean back against his chest one last time, storing away the feeling. "Happy anniversary, Victoria," he whispered against my hair. 40 years, I replied softly. The day unfolded according to plan. Jessica and Mark took their father fishing while I prepared the house with my daughter-in-law and son-in-law. My mother sat on the porch swing, occasionally offering advice, but mostly enjoying watching her family bustle around her. "You've built something beautiful, Victoria," she said when I brought her a glass of iced tea. "Your father would be proud." I sat beside her for a moment, taking her weathered hand in mine. "Would you still be proud of me if everything changed?" I asked quietly. She studied me with the sharp blue eyes that age hadn't dulled. "Are you still the daughter I raised to value truth and dignity?" I nodded slowly. "Then nothing could make me prouder," she said firmly, squeezing my hand. By late afternoon, the caterers had arrived, setting up on the sprawling deck that overlooked the lake. White linens covered the long table, crystal glasses catching the golden light, flower arrangements in silver vases, roses and hydrangeas, in cream and navy, centered each place setting. Perfect. Everything was perfect. I dressed carefully for the evening, slipping into the navy sheath dress that Grace had helped me select. It was elegant but understated, hugging my figure in a way that made me look 10 years younger. I fastened the pearl necklace Richard had given me on our 25th anniversary around my neck, applied my makeup with precision, and slid my feet into silver heels. The woman who stared back at me from the mirror looked composed, dignified, resolute. I reached into the bedside drawer and retrieved the silver frame, slipping it into my evening clutch. Then I took a deep breath and went downstairs to join my family. Richard looked handsome in his charcoal suit, his silver hair freshly trimmed. When he saw me descending the stairs, his face lit up with the same admiration I'd seen on our wedding day. "You take my breath away," he said, taking my hand as I reached the bottom step. Our family gathered around, Jessica snapping photos, Thomas raising a glass in an impromptu toast. "To Richard and Victoria," he called, showing us all how it's done for 40 incredible years. Everyone cheered. I smiled and sipped my champagne, feeling the cold liquid slide down my throat. The evening was perfect. Sunset painting the lake gold and crimson as we gathered around the elegantly set table on the deck. Candles flickered in the gentle breeze as we enjoyed the catered meal. Conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of glasses. After the main course was cleared, Richard stood, champagne flute in hand. The moment I'd been dreading and waiting for had arrived. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, his voice warm as he gazed around the table. 40 years ago today, I married the most beautiful, kind, intelligent woman I've ever known." He turned to me, his eyes soft with what looked like genuine love. "Victoria, you've given me everything a man could want. A wonderful family, a partner in life's adventures, a home filled with love." Our children smiled tearfully. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "These 40 years have been the greatest gift of my life," Richard continued, his voice thick with emotion. "And I want to thank you, in front of everyone who matters, to us, for being the perfect wife, mother, and partner." As everyone raised their glasses, I felt something shift inside me. The perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect partner. A role I'd played flawlessly, without ever knowing I was performing in a production where half the script had been kept from me. Richard sat down beside me, taking my hand under the table and squeezing it gently. I squeezed back, then slowly rose to my feet, picking up my own champagne flute. "I'd like to say something too," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. All eyes turned to me expectantly. Jessica smiled encouragingly. Mark winked. 40 years is a long time," I began. "Long enough to build a life together. Long enough to raise children, to watch them grow into amazing adults." I smiled at Jessica and Mark. "Long enough to create thousands of memories." I took a small sip of champagne, feeling the weight of the small silver frame in my clutch where it sat, on my lap. "But I've recently discovered that 40 years isn't long enough to truly know someone," I continued, my voice growing quieter, forcing everyone to lean in. "Not when that someone has been living a double life for more than 3 decades. Confused silence fell over the table. I felt Richard stiffen beside me. "Vicky," he said softly, a warning note in his voice. I ignored him, opening my clutch and removing the small silver frame. I held it in my hand, still hidden from view. "Did you know," I said, looking around at our family's suddenly concerned faces, "that you have a brother? That I have a stepson? That there's a little girl who is as much Richard's granddaughter as Jessica's son, or any future children Mark and Olivia might have?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. Mark stared at his father, brow furrowed in confusion. "Mom?" Jessica began uncertainly. I placed the framed photograph on the table, turning it to face our children. "His name is Nathan Parker. He's 32 years old. Your father has been supporting him financially since birth and maintaining a relationship with him in secret throughout your entire lives." Richard's face had drained of all color. "Victoria, please." "Please what, Richard? Please don't tell our children the truth. Please keep pretending our marriage hasn't been built on a foundation of lies." My voice remained calm, controlled. "I found the paternity test. I found the safety deposit box with the photos. I found the trust fund you set up, the one designed to buy my silence if I ever discovered your secret." The silence around the table was absolute now. Even the sounds of the lake seemed to have stilled. "How long have you known?" Richard finally asked, his voice barely audible. 10 days, I replied evenly. "I found the test results while you were in Chicago." Jessica reached for the photograph with trembling fingers. "Dad," she whispered, "is this true?" Richard looked at our daughter, then at our son, whose face had hardened into something I'd never seen before. Then he looked at me. "Yes," he said finally. "It's true." The admission hung in the air like smoke. 32 years, I said quietly. That means he was conceived when I was pregnant with Mark. I turned to our son, whose face had gone ashen. "Your father was having an affair while I was carrying you." Mark pushed back from the table abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the deck. Without a word, he walked to the railing and stood with his back to us, staring out at the darkening lake. Olivia half rose as if to follow him, then sank back down, her eyes wide with shock. "It wasn't like that," Richard said, his voice strained. "It wasn't an ongoing affair. It was. It was one weekend, a mistake. Diana and we worked together when I was opening the Pinecrest store. It happened once." "A mistake that resulted in a child you've been seeing behind our backs for 32 years, I said quietly. Jessica was still staring at the photograph. "He looks like Mark," she whispered. "I wanted to tell you," Richard said, looking around the table desperately. "So many times, I wanted to tell all of you. But at first, Diana didn't want me involved beyond financial support. Then, when Nathan was older and wanted to meet me, it had been so long. I didn't know how to explain." "So you just kept lying," Thomas said flatly. "It wasn't a question." Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. "I made a terrible mistake. And then I made it worse by hiding it. I know that. But Victoria..." He turned to me, his eyes pleading. "You have to believe me when I say I've loved you every day of our marriage. That's never been a lie." I looked at him. This man I'd loved for 40 years, this stranger I was only now meeting, and felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. "I believe you think that's true," I said quietly. "But love without honesty isn't really love at all, is it?" The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The dessert the caterers had prepared, an elegant replica of our wedding cake, went untouched. Our family dispersed in shocked silence, Jessica and Daniel retreating to their room, Mark continuing to stand at the railing until Olivia finally coaxed him inside, my mother squeezing my hand before Thomas and Linda helped her to her room. Richard and I were left alone on the deck, the candles burning low, lake waters lapping gently at the shore below. "What happens now?" he finally asked, his voice hollow. I looked at him in the flickering light. The man I'd built my life with. The man who'd lied to me for 3 decades. I don't know, I answered truthfully. But whatever happens next, it will be my choice, not yours. I stood and gathered my clutch, leaving the framed photograph on the table between us. The physical embodiment of the truth that now stood between us as well. As I walked toward the house, I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't known I was carrying had finally been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in 10 days, perhaps for the first time in 30 years, I was walking in complete truth. And despite everything, that felt like freedom. Part 4. The resolution. The morning after our anniversary dinner dawned gray and overcast. The lake shrouded in mist that matched the heavy silence inside the house. I'd spent the night in the small guest room at the end of the hall, listening to the occasional creak of floorboards as family members moved restlessly through the house, unable to sleep after the evening's revelations. I rose early, dressing, in simple slacks and a sweater before making my way downstairs. To my surprise, my mother was already in the kitchen, methodically measuring coffee grounds. "Good morning," she said quietly, as if it were any ordinary day. I leaned against the counter beside her. "Did you sleep?" "At my age, sleep is a luxury even on good nights," she replied, starting the coffee maker. We stood in silence as it began to gurgle and hiss. Finally, she turned to me. "You handled yourself with dignity last night. Your father would have been proud." The simple words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. She squeezed my hand. "What happens next is your decision, Victoria. But remember, you're 62, not 90. There's still plenty of life ahead, whatever you choose." The family emerged slowly, drawn by the smell of coffee and the necessity of facing each other after the previous night's revelations. Jessica appeared first, her eyes red-rimmed, but her chin set in a determined line reminiscent of her father's. She poured herself coffee, then sat beside me at the kitchen table. "Have you known, all along, about—" She couldn't quite bring herself to say his name. "Nathan," I supplied gently. "No. I found out 10 days ago, just before your father returned, from Chicago." She nodded slowly. "And you waited until last night to confront him? Why?" I took a careful sip of my coffee before answering. "Because I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with first, and because after 30 years of being kept in the dark, I wanted to choose the moment when everything came to light." "Are you going to leave Dad?" she asked bluntly. I met her gaze steadily. "I don't know yet." By mid-morning, the house had taken on the hushed atmosphere of a funeral. Thomas and Linda announced they would be leaving early, making awkward goodbyes before escaping the tension. Jessica and Daniel retreated to the dock, deep in conversation. Mark had barely emerged from his room, accepting the coffee Olivia brought him with a wordless nod. Richard had made himself scarce, though I'd glimpsed him through the window, walking alone along the lake shore, shoulders hunched against the brisk spring wind. Around noon, as I was helping my mother pack her things, she'd decided to leave with Thomas and Linda. I heard a car on the gravel driveway. Looking out the window, I saw Grace step out of her sedan, her expression concerned. I met her on the porch. "I've been calling you," she said, hugging me tightly. "When you didn't answer, I got worried. I realized my phone had been off since before dinner the night before. I'm sorry, it's been intense." She studied my face. "You told them?" I nodded. "How did it go?" "About as well as you'd expect." I led her inside, grateful for her familiar, steadying presence. By early afternoon, the house had emptied further. My mother left with Thomas and Linda. Jessica and Daniel announced they would return to town. Jessica couldn't look her father in the eye, and Daniel seemed relieved to escape the tension. Only Mark and Olivia remained, Mark finally emerging to sit silently on the deck, staring out at the lake with an expression that reminded me painfully of his father. I found Richard in our bedroom, meticulously folding clothes into his suitcase. "You're leaving?" I asked from the doorway. He looked up, his face drawn with exhaustion and grief. "I thought it might be best. Give you some space." He hesitated. "Unless you want me to stay?" I considered the question carefully. "I think space would be good. For both of us." He nodded, returning to his packing with mechanical movements. "Victoria," he began, then stopped, struggling for words. "I know sorry isn't enough, not nearly enough, but I am sorry, more than I can ever express." I watched him, this man I'd shared my life with, whose habits and expressions were as familiar to me as my own reflection, and felt a complex tangle of emotions. Anger, grief, betrayal, but also, unexpectedly, a flicker of compassion. "I never meant to hurt you," Richard said, his voice breaking slightly. "You have to believe that." "I believe you never meant for me to find out," I replied evenly. "That's not quite the same thing." He winced, acknowledging the truth of my words. "What will you tell the children? About us, I mean." I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining distance between us. "I'll tell them the truth, that I don't know what comes next, that I need time to decide what I want the rest of my life to look like." Richard nodded slowly, his hands stilling on the shirt he'd been folding. "And what about Nathan?" he asked, quietly. Would you want to meet him?" The question caught me off guard. In all my planning, in all my careful gathering of information, I hadn't allowed myself to think beyond the moment of revelation. I hadn't considered what might come after. "I don't know," I admitted. "He's an innocent party in all this, but he's also a stranger to me." "He's a good man," Richard said softly. "Kind, thoughtful, talented. He designs beautiful outdoor spaces." A small, sad smile crossed his face. "He has Jessica's laugh, and your eyes." I stood abruptly, unwilling to hear more. "I should check on Mark. He's taking this particularly hard." Richard nodded, understanding my retreat. "Of course." I paused at the doorway, turning back to look at him one final time. "When did you start seeing him? Nathan, I mean. You said Diana didn't want you involved at first." Richard sat heavily on the bed. "He was 14. Diana finally told him about me, and he wanted to meet. We started with lunch once a month. Then birthdays, graduations. I missed so much of his childhood, Vicky. I was trying to make up for lost time." "While keeping him a secret from your other children," I pointed out. "From me." "Yes. No excuses, no justifications. Just the simple acknowledgement of his choice." I nodded once, then left him to his packing. I found Mark where I expected, on the deck, still staring out at the lake. Olivia had left him alone, understanding his need for solitude. I sat in the chair beside him, saying nothing, offering my presence if he wanted it. After several minutes, he spoke without looking at me. "When I was in high school, Dad missed my regional swimming championship to attend a business conference in Portland." His voice was flat. I wonder now if he was actually at Nathan's high school graduation. I reached over and took his hand. "I don't know, sweetheart." Mark turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed but dry. "How can you be so calm? He betrayed all of us. He lied to us our entire lives." "Being angry takes energy I need for other things right now," I said simply, "like figuring out what I want to do next." "Are you going to divorce him?" The question hung between us in the crisp spring air. "I don't know yet," I answered truthfully. 40 years is a long time to walk away from without careful consideration. Mark's jaw tightened. "If Dad left now, would you be okay? Financially, I mean." The question surprised me. "Yes. Your father has been many things, but financially irresponsible isn't one of them. The house is paid off. There are retirement." Accounts, investments. I'd be fine. He nodded, seemingly relieved. Good, because if you want to leave, Olivia and I want you to know you could stay with us until you figure things out. We have the spare room. Tears pricked my eyes at his protectiveness. Thank you, sweetheart. But whatever happens, I'll be all right. By late afternoon, Richard had packed his car and was preparing to leave. He stood awkwardly in the driveway. As Mark loaded our suitcases into his SUV, my son had insisted on driving me home rather than letting me ride with Richard as planned. I'll be staying at the Renaissance downtown for a few days, Richard told me quietly. Until we figure things out. He hesitated. Will you call me when you're ready to talk? I nodded, maintaining the composed facade I'd worn since the previous night. Yes, but I don't know when that will be. He moved as if to embrace me, then stopped himself, shoving his hands in his pockets instead. I understand. Take all the time you need. He glanced at Mark, who was deliberately busying himself with the luggage. Tell Mark. Tell him I'm sorry, that I'd like to talk when he's ready. I will. Richard nodded once more, then got into his car and drove away, gravel crunching under his tires as he disappeared down the long driveway. I watched until his taillights vanished, feeling strangely hollow. Grace appeared at my side, squeezing my arm gently. Do you want me to come stay with you for a few days? I could reschedule my appointments. I shook my head. Thank you, but no. I need some time alone to think. Call me any time, she insisted, day or night. As we prepared to leave, I took one last walk through the lake house, touching familiar surfaces, looking at family photos that now seemed like artifacts from a different life. In the living room, I paused before the large framed photograph from our 25th anniversary, Richard and me surrounded by Jessica and Mark, all of us smiling broadly at the camera. I carefully removed it from the wall and placed it face down, in a drawer. Not destroyed, but no longer on display. The drive home with Mark and Olivia was mostly silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. When we arrived at the house, the home Richard and I had shared for 28 years, Mark insisted on coming inside, checking all the rooms as if expecting to find his father hiding somewhere. I'm fine, sweetheart, I assured him. Really? He frowned, unconvinced. You'll call if you need anything? Promise? I hugged him tightly. I promise. After they left, I wandered through the empty house, the silence pressing in around me. Everything looked exactly as it had when I'd left for the lake house just 2 days earlier. Yet everything had changed. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator, still stocked with the groceries I'd bought before our trip. I should eat something, I knew, but the thought of food turned my stomach. Instead, I poured a glass of wine and carried it to the sunroom, at the back of the house, my favorite space, filled with plants and flooded with natural light during the day. Night had fallen now, though, and I sat in the darkness, sipping my wine and trying to make sense of the fragmented pieces of my life. What did I want? Divorce seemed the expected response, the righteous path after such a profound betrayal. But 62 was a difficult age to start over. And despite everything, there were 4 decades of shared history between Richard and me. Could that be set aside so easily? My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Just checking that you got home safe. Love you, Mom. I smiled faintly, typing back. Safe and sound. Love you too. Another buzz, this time from Mark. Call if you need anything. Anything at all. I was typing a response when a third message appeared, from Richard. I know you need space and time. Just wanted to say I'm sorry again. For everything. I set the phone down without responding to either message, returning to my contemplation of the darkness beyond the windows. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended state. I moved through familiar routines in a house that felt simultaneously mine and not mine. I watered plants, collected mail, paid bills, all the mundane tasks of daily life continuing despite the seismic shift in my personal landscape. Richard kept his distance as promised, though he texted once daily with simple messages. Thinking of you. Hope you're doing okay. Here when you're ready to talk. I read each one but didn't respond. Jessica called every evening, her initial shock giving way to anger on my behalf. I still can't believe he did this, she fumed during one call. 32 years of lies. And he had the nerve to stand up at that dinner and talk about you being the perfect wife. It's complicated, Jess, I said, surprising myself by feeling the need to temper her fury. It's not complicated, Mom. It's wrong. Period. Mark was quieter in his rage, but no less intense. He'd stopped speaking to his father entirely, returning Richard's calls and texts with stony silence. Grace visited often, bringing food I barely touched and offering a sympathetic ear. Have you decided what you want to do? She asked on the fourth day as we sat on my back patio. I sighed, watching a hummingbird flit between the feeders I'd hung years ago. I'm working through it step by step. I've consulted with Howard about my financial options. I've looked into what divorce would entail at this stage of life. I turned to look at her, but I haven't made a final decision yet. Grace nodded, thoughtfully. And what about Nathan, Richard's other son? The question still provoked a visceral reaction, a tightening in my chest, a momentary shortness of breath. What about him? Are you curious about who he is, about the life Richard has had with him? I hadn't allowed myself to dwell on Nathan Parker. It was easier to focus on the betrayal, on Richard's lies, than to think about the young man who shared my children's blood, but not their history. I don't know, I admitted finally. Part of me wants nothing to do with that whole situation. But another part is curious, Grace finished for me. I nodded reluctantly. He's my children's half-brother, my grandchild's uncle. That makes him something to me. I just don't know what. Grace leaned forward, her expression gentle but challenging. Vicky, you know I'll support whatever you decide about Richard, but may I offer one piece of advice? Of course. Don't make any irreversible decisions while you're still in shock. Give yourself time to process everything, to consider all angles. I smiled faintly. That's very rational advice. Well, one of us has to be, she replied with a wry smile. And you've been through a lot. The following morning, I woke with a surprising sense of purpose. After a week of existing in a fog of uncertainty, I suddenly knew what my next step needed to be. I showered and dressed with care, choosing a simple but elegant outfit, tailored slacks, a soft blue blouse, minimal jewelry. I applied makeup lightly, just enough to bring some color to my face. Then I got in my car and drove to Pinecrest. Diana Parker's gallery was located on a quaint street in the historic downtown area. The window display featured blown glass sculptures that caught the late morning sunlight, sending prisms of color dancing across the sidewalk. A small sign indicated the gallery was open. My heart hammered in my chest as I pushed open the door, a small bell announcing my arrival. The gallery was empty of customers, just a woman arranging a display case near the back. She looked up at the sound of the bell, a professional smile ready on her face. Good morning. Please feel free to look around and let me know if you have any questions. Diana Parker was still attractive at 54, her dark hair now threaded with silver, her figure slender in a simple black dress. She had no idea who I was, I realized. No recognition dawned in her eyes as she looked at me. I moved further, into the gallery, pretending to examine a collection of ceramic pieces while gathering my courage. Finally, I turned to face her directly. I'm Victoria Reynolds, I said simply. The change in her expression was immediate. Shock, followed quickly by wariness. "Victoria," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Richard's wife." I nodded. "I think we're overdue for a conversation, don't you?" Diana glanced toward the door, as if checking for escape routes, then seemed to steel herself. "Yes, I suppose we are." She moved to the front of the gallery and flipped the sign from open to closed, then locked the door. "There's a small office in the back. We can talk there." I followed her through the gallery to a tidy office space with 2 chairs and a small desk. Diana gestured for me to sit, then took the chair opposite me, her posture rigid with tension. "Richard called me," she said after a moment. "He told me you found out, that you told your family at your anniversary dinner." "Did he tell you how I found out? That I discovered the paternity test he'd hidden in our filing cabinet?" Diana winced slightly. "Yes, he mentioned that." A silence stretched between us. 2 women connected by an invisible thread neither had chosen. "How much do you know?" Diana finally asked. "About Nathan and Richard, I mean." "I know Richard has been paying child support since Nathan was born. I know he started seeing Nathan when he was 14. I know there are regular payments, plus larger sums for special occasions. I know about the trust fund." I met her gaze steadily. "What I don't know is whether you and Richard continued your relationship after Nathan was conceived." Diana shook her head firmly. "No, never. It was one weekend, Victoria. A terrible mistake we both regretted immediately." She sighed, running, a hand through her hair. "I was young, 22. Richard was successful, charming. He mentioned he was married, had a daughter, and that his wife was pregnant with their second child. But he seemed so unhappy, so alone. And that justified sleeping with him?" My voice remained calm despite the anger simmering beneath. "No," she said without hesitation. "Nothing justified it. I'm not proud of what happened. But Nathan—" Her expression softened. "Nathan was the one good thing that came from that mistake." I studied her, searching for signs of deception, but found only weary honesty in her face. "Why tell Richard about the pregnancy at all? Why not just handle it on your own?" The question had been nagging at me since I'd discovered the truth. Diana looked surprised. "Because Nathan deserved to know his father, and because Richard had a right to know he had a son." She leaned forward slightly. "I never asked for anything beyond basic support, Victoria. I didn't want to disrupt your family. But when Nathan started asking questions about his father, I couldn't lie to him. So instead, Richard lied to us," I said, a edge creeping into my voice. "Yes," Diana acknowledged quietly. "That was his choice, not mine." Another silence fell between us, less tense than before, but still weighted with 3 decades of unspoken history. "What is he like?" I asked finally. "Nathan." Diana's face transformed, maternal pride shining through. "He's wonderful, kind, creative. He has his own landscape architecture firm now. He designs beautiful gardens and public spaces." She hesitated, then added gently, "He has Richard's eye for design, and his smile." The comparison stung more than I'd expected. "Does he know about me? About Jessica and Mark?" "Yes," Diana admitted. "Richard told him when he was older, maybe 16 or 17. Nathan always understood that your family didn't know about him, that his relationship with Richard needed to remain private." "Private," I repeated. Such a polite word for secret. Diana didn't flinch from my bitterness. "You have every right to be angry, Victoria. What Richard did, keeping Nathan a secret from you and your children, was wrong. I told him so, many times over the years. Yet you enabled it." "For Nathan's sake," she said firmly. "He needed his father." even if it was only for occasional lunches and phone calls. I absorbed this, trying to imagine what it would have been like for Nathan, knowing his father had another family who knew nothing of his existence. What a strange, painful position to be in. Does he want to meet us? I asked suddenly, surprising myself with the question. Jessica and Mark, I mean. And me. Diana's expression turned cautious. Nathan has always been curious about his half-siblings, but he would never want to cause pain or disruption. She paused. As for meeting you, I think he would welcome it, if that's something you wanted, but he would understand if you didn't. I nodded slowly, processing this information. Thank you for being honest with me. Diana offered a sad smile. After 32 years of secrets, honesty seems like the least I can offer. As I stood to leave, Diana reached for a business card from her desk and wrote something on the back. This is Nathan's number, she said, holding it out to me. If you ever want to contact him directly, no pressure either way. I hesitated, then took the card, slipping it into my purse without looking at it. Goodbye, Diana. Goodbye, Victoria. And I truly am sorry. For everything. As I drove home from Pinecrest, my mind replayed the conversation with Diana Parker. She wasn't what I'd expected, not the scheming temptress or bitter other woman I'd imagined, just a woman who'd made a mistake decades ago and had spent her life dealing with the consequences. The business card with Nathan's number seemed to burn in my purse, a tangible connection to the life that had run parallel to mine for 32 years without my knowledge. By the time I arrived home, I'd made a decision. I texted Richard. I'm ready to talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. The house. His response came immediately. I'll be there. Thank you, Vicky. That evening, I called both Jessica and Mark, asking them to come over the following evening. I'm going to talk to your father tomorrow afternoon, I explained to each of them. Afterward, I'd like to speak with both of you about what happens next. Have you decided? Jessica asked cautiously. Yes, I said simply. But I want to speak with your father first. I slept more soundly that night than I had since discovering the paternity test. Not because the pain had lessened, but because the fog of uncertainty had finally lifted. I knew what I needed to do. Part 5. The Transformation. Richard arrived. Precisely at 2 o'clock the next day, looking haggard and uncertain as he stood on the doorstep of our home. I invited him in wordlessly, leading him to the living room where we had spent countless evenings over the decades. Thank you for agreeing to see me, he said as we sat across from each other, him on the sofa, me in the armchair I'd always favored. A subtle reshuffling of our usual positions, a physical manifestation of the distance between us. I went to see Diana Parker yesterday, I said without preamble. Richard's eyes widened in surprise. You did? Why? Because I needed to hear her perspective, to understand the full picture before making any decisions. He nodded slowly. That's fair. What did she tell you? That it was a brief affair. That you never rekindled it after Nathan was conceived. That she encouraged you to tell us about him many times over the years. I held his gaze steadily. Was she telling the truth? Yes, Richard replied, without hesitation. All of it. Diana never wanted our mistake to hurt you or the children. She would have been content with child support and nothing more. But you wanted a relationship with Nathan. Not at first, he admitted, his voice soft with regret. At first, I just wanted the problem to go away. I sent money, signed the papers, and tried to forget. He shook his head. But when Nathan was 14 and Diana told me he wanted to meet me, I couldn't say no. And once I met him, his voice caught. Once I met him, I couldn't stay away. He was my son too. Yet you chose to keep him separate from the rest of your life. From us. Richard looked down at his hands. I told myself it was to protect everyone. That bringing Nathan into our lives would only cause pain. But the truth is, I was a coward. I was afraid of losing you, of losing Jessica and Mark's respect. So I compartmentalized. I told myself I could be a father to all three of my children without ever having to merge those worlds. And you never considered how that might affect Nathan, growing up knowing his father had another family who knew nothing about him? Richard flinched. I justified it by telling myself Nathan had Diana, a mother who adored him, who gave him a good life, that he didn't need me the way Jessica and Mark did. He met my eyes again. But that was just another lie I told myself. The truth is, I failed all of my children, and I failed you most of all. I studied him. This man I had loved for 40 years, whose flaws and strengths I knew intimately or thought I did. Diana gave me Nathan's number, I said after a moment. She said he might be open to meeting us. Jessica and Mark, I mean. And me. Richard's expression flickered with surprise, then hope. Would you consider that? Meeting him? I'm thinking about it, I replied honestly. He's innocent in all this, and he's connected to my children whether I acknowledge it or not. Richard nodded, a cautious relief spreading across his face. He's a good man, Vicky. You'd like him, I think. He has your sense of fairness, your eye for beauty. I raised a hand, stopping him. Don't. Don't try to create connections that don't exist. If I meet Nathan, it will be on my terms, not as some extension of my relationship with you. Of course, he said quickly. I'm sorry. A silence stretched between us, heavy with 4 decades of shared history and the weight of what had been hidden within it. I've made a decision, I said finally. Richard straightened, his expression a mixture of fear and resignation. About us? Yes. I took a deep breath. I'm not filing for divorce. Not right now. His face registered shock. You're not? No, but I'm not continuing our marriage as it was either. I leaned forward, my voice firm. I need time and space, Richard. Time to process everything I've learned. Space to figure out who I am outside of our marriage. What does that mean exactly? It means I'm asking you to move out, permanently. I'll be staying in the house. He nodded slowly. Okay, that's fair. I'm going to travel, see some of the places we always talked about but never visited. Spend time with Jessica and her family in Seattle. Maybe visit Mark and Olivia in the city for longer stretches. Alone? The word carried all his fear. Yes, alone. Or with friends. But not with you. I softened my voice slightly. I'm not saying never, Richard. I'm saying not now. Not until I've had time to rebuild my sense of self. A self that isn't defined by being your wife or Jessica and Mark's mother. Richard swallowed hard. And financially? Should I continue depositing my salary as usual, or… Howard is drawing up a formal separation agreement, I interrupted. It will outline support payments and division of our monthly expenses. You'll continue to run the business as always. We'll maintain our joint accounts for now, but I'm opening individual accounts as well. He accepted this with a nod. When will you tell the children? They're coming over tonight. I'll explain my decision. Then, I paused, studying him. Would you like to be here for that conversation? Hope flickered across his face. If you think that would be helpful, yes. 7 o'clock then. I stood, signaling the end of our conversation. And Richard, I expect complete honesty from you going forward, about everything. Absolute honesty, he promised, rising to his feet. No more secrets. Ever. As I showed him to the door, he turned to me one last time. Thank you, Vicky, for not closing the door completely. I met his gaze steadily. I've invested 40 years in this marriage, Richard. That's not something I can walk away from without careful consideration. But don't mistake my choice for forgiveness. We're not there yet. I understand, he said quietly. I'll do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes. After he left, I moved through the house slowly, touching familiar objects, looking at photographs that chronicled our shared life. So many memories, so many moments of genuine love and connection. Could they possibly outweigh the 3 decades of deception? I didn't know. But I knew I wasn't ready to discard them entirely. Not yet. Jessica and Mark arrived together that evening, their expressions cautious as they entered the house. When I told them their father would be joining us, tension immediately tightened, their features. "You're not taking him back, are you?" Mark asked bluntly. "Let's wait until he gets here," I suggested gently. "I'd rather explain everything once." When Richard arrived, the atmosphere in the living room grew stiff with unspoken accusations. Jessica refused to look directly at her father. Mark sat rigidly beside his sister, jaw clenched in barely contained anger. I took a deep breath and began. "I've made some decisions about my future, about our future as a family, and I wanted to share them with all of you together." 3 pairs of eyes focused intently on me. "I'm not filing for divorce," I said clearly. "At least, not right now." Jessica sucked in a sharp breath. Mark's frown deepened. "But," I continued before they could interrupt, "your father and I will be living separately. I'm keeping the house. He'll find his own place." "So, you're separating?" Jessica clarified. "Yes, formally, legally separating, with the understanding that reconciliation may or may not be possible in the future." Mark leaned forward. "Mom, are you sure about this? After what he did?" I looked at my son, so protective, so angry on my behalf, and smiled gently. "I'm sure about taking time to make a careful decision rather than a reactive one. 40 years is a long time to share with someone. I need space to figure out what I want the rest of my life to look like." "What about him?" Jessica asked, deliberately avoiding her father's name. "Nathan," I supplied, just as I had during our phone conversation. "That's something else I wanted to discuss with you both. Diana gave me his contact information. I'm considering reaching out to him." The silence that followed was profound. Jessica and Mark exchanged startled glances. "Why would you want to meet him?" Mark finally asked, his voice strained. "Because he's your half-brother," I said simply. "Because he's connected to our family whether we acknowledge it or not. And because none of this is his fault." Jessica's expression softened slightly. "Have you met him, Dad? What's he like?" It was the first time she'd directly addressed her father since entering the house. Richard seemed momentarily stunned by the question. "Yes," he said carefully. "I've known Nathan since he was 14. He's a good person, thoughtful, creative. He designs gardens and parks. He has his own landscape architecture firm in Portland." "Is he married? Does he have kids?" Jessica pressed. "He's married to Claire. They have a 3-year-old daughter named Lily." Mark's head snapped up. "I have a niece?" Richard nodded, a pained expression crossing his face. "Yes, you do." A heavy silence descended on the room as Jessica and Mark absorbed this information. Not just a half-brother they'd never known about, but a niece as well. "I want to make something very clear," I said, looking between my children. "Whatever relationship you choose to have or not have with Nathan is entirely your decision. The same goes for me. We're all adults here, capable of making our own choices." "But you're considering meeting him?" Jessica asked. "Yes, not immediately. But eventually, I think I would like to." Mark stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "This is so messed up," he muttered. "Our whole family history feels like a lie." "Not all of it," I said firmly. The love in this family has always been real, Mark. Your father's deception doesn't change that. Richard spoke for the first time since answering Jessica's questions. I know I've hurt all of you deeply. I can never undo that. But if you're willing, I'd like the chance to rebuild something with each of you, something based on complete honesty from now on. Jessica studied him, her expression unreadable. I need time, Dad. It's a lot to process. Me, too, Mark added, his anger seemingly diminished but not gone. I'm not ready to just move past this. I understand, Richard said quietly. Take all the time you need, both of you. I'll be here when you're ready. As the evening drew to a close, I walked them all to the door. Jessica hugged me tightly. Are you sure about this, Mom? The separation instead of divorce? I nodded against her shoulder. I'm sure about giving myself time to make the right decision, whatever that turns out to be. Mark embraced me next, his arms strong around my shoulders. Call if you need anything at all. I will, sweetheart. Richard was the last to leave. He paused on the threshold, looking back at me with a mixture of regret and hope. Thank you, Vicky, for giving me even this much chance. Offered a small nod. Good night, Richard. After closing the door, I leaned against it for a long moment, feeling both drained and oddly liberated. The future stretched before me, uncertain, yes, but also full of possibilities I hadn't considered before. The following week passed in a whirlwind of practical arrangements. Howard finalized our separation agreement. Richard found a small apartment downtown and moved his essential belongings out of the house. I opened my own bank accounts and began the process of establishing financial independence. Through it all, I felt a growing sense of purpose, of reclaiming my identity beyond wife and mother. 2 weeks after our family meeting, I sat in my sunroom with Diana Parker's business card. In my hand, Nathan's number written on the back in her elegant script. After minutes of deliberation, I picked up my phone and dialed. A male voice answered on the third ring. Hello? Nathan? This is Victoria Reynolds, Richard's wife. A startled pause. Mrs. Reynolds, I wasn't expecting your call. Please call me Victoria. I took a deep breath. I was wondering if you might be open to meeting sometime, just to talk. Another pause, longer this time. Yes, he said finally, his voice warm with cautious hope. I'd like that very much. We arranged to meet the following weekend at a neutral location, a cafe halfway between Oak Ridge and Portland. As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of rightness. This meeting wouldn't erase the past or heal all wounds, but it was a step toward something new, a future constructed from my own choices rather than Richard's deceptions. The next morning, I booked a flight to Seattle to visit Jessica for a week, followed by a solo trip to the coast I'd been wanting to take for years. Then, I called Grace. I've been thinking about that pottery class you mentioned last year, I said when she answered. The one I was too busy to take because of Richard's business dinners. Is it still running? Every Wednesday evening, she confirmed. Why? Are you interested? Yes, I said, surprising myself with how certain I felt. It's time I tried something new. Over the next few months, my life began to take a different shape. I traveled, not just to visit my children, but to places I'd always wanted to see. I took classes, pottery, then photography, then a cooking course specializing in cuisines Richard had never enjoyed. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones, and yes, I met Nathan. Our first meeting was awkward, tense with unspoken history, but as we talked about his work, his daughter, his life, I began to see him not as a symbol of Richard's betrayal, but as a person in his own right. A person connected to my children by blood, if not shared history. Jessica eventually agreed to meet him too, approaching the relationship with cautious curiosity. Mark took longer, his sense of betrayal deeper, more personal somehow. But eventually, he too reached out, drawn by the connection to his niece Lily, if nothing else. As for Richard and me, that story is still being written. We meet occasionally for coffee or dinner, carefully rebuilding a foundation of trust that had been severely damaged. Sometimes I see glimpses of the man I fell in love with all those years ago. Sometimes the pain of his deception feels too fresh to move beyond. I don't know if we'll find our way back to each other. I don't know if I want us to. What I do know is that at 62, I've discovered a version of myself I never knew existed. A woman who makes choices based not on obligation or expectation, but on her own desires and boundaries. The betrayal that could have destroyed me instead became the catalyst for my transformation. In losing the certainty of who I thought I was, Richard Reynolds' wife, the matriarch of our perfect family, I found the freedom to discover who I could be. And that, despite everything, feels like a gift I never expected to receive. 6 months into my separation from Richard, I found myself standing at the edge of Cedar Lake, watching the sunset over the water. I'd returned to the lake house alone, needing to reclaim this space that had been the setting for both decades of family memories and the dramatic unraveling of my marriage. The last time I'd stood on this dock, we'd been celebrating 40 years, together. Now I was here to decide if there would be a 41st. "I thought I might find you here," a voice said behind me. I turned to see Grace approaching, 2 glasses of wine in hand. She'd driven up with me for moral support, though she'd given me space most of the day to wander the property alone, lost in reflection. "Here," she said, handing me one of the glasses. "Seemed like you could use this." I accepted it with a grateful smile. "Am I that predictable?" "No," she replied, coming to stand beside me. "That's actually what I admire most about you these days. Victoria Reynolds has become decidedly unpredictable." The observation made me laugh softly. It was true. In the month since discovering Richard's secret son, I'd made choices that had surprised everyone, including myself. The careful, accommodating woman who had built her identity around being a supportive wife and mother had given way to someone more independent, more willing to prioritize her own needs. "Richard called again this morning," I admitted, taking a sip of wine. "He wants to know if I've made a decision." Grace raised an eyebrow. "And have you?" I gazed out over the darkening water, watching a pair of loons glide across the surface. "I think I have. But I wanted to be here, in this place, to be certain." The last 6 months had been a journey unlike any I'd expected to take at 62. After the initial shock wore off, after the practical matters of separation were arranged, I'd found myself facing the most fundamental of questions. Who was Victoria Reynolds without Richard? The answer had unfolded slowly, in small moments, and larger realizations. I was someone who enjoyed traveling alone, who preferred documentaries to the action films Richard always chose, who loved spicy food that he'd always found too intense. I was a woman who could change a tire, thanks to a class at the community center, negotiate fiercely, as demonstrated when selling one of our joint investments, and find joy in simple pleasures like watching thunderstorms from my porch swing. I'd also discovered something unexpected, a capacity for forgiveness I hadn't known I possessed. "Richard and I had lunch last week," I told Grace, still gazing at the water. "He told me Nathan's wife is expecting another baby. I'm going to be a step-grandmother again." Grace studied me carefully. "How did that make you feel?" "Oddly happy," I admitted. "I've gotten to know Nathan over these past months. He's a good man. His daughter Lily is a delight. This baby, it's innocent in all this. Just another branch of a family tree that's more complicated than I ever imagined." My relationship with Nathan had evolved gradually from awkward first meetings into something resembling genuine friendship. He'd been respectful of my feelings, patient with my questions, and unfailingly kind. It was impossible to blame him for the circumstances of his birth or the secrets that had surrounded his existence. Jessica had embraced her half-brother with surprising ease, finding common ground in their shared artistic sensibilities. Mark had been more reluctant, but his resistance had softened after Nathan invited him to collaborate on a park project in the city. The architect and the landscape designer creating something beautiful together. "And Richard?" Grace prompted, gently. "Where do things stand with him?" I took another sip of wine, considering the question. He's changed. Or perhaps he's simply showing me parts of himself he kept hidden before. He's more vulnerable, more open. I turned to face her directly. He told me something last week that I can't stop thinking about. "What's that?" He said that living without me these past months has shown him that he'd spent decades performing the role of husband, without truly understanding what it meant to be a partner. That he'd compartmentalized his life, family, business, his relationship with Nathan, thinking that was the way to protect everyone, when really it was just a way to protect himself from having to be fully honest with anyone. Grace nodded, thoughtfully. "That sounds like a hard-won insight." "It was," I agreed. And it made me realize something too. I'd been performing as well, playing the perfect wife, the understanding mother, so focused on maintaining the appearance of an ideal family that I missed signs that should have been obvious. The evening air had grown chilly as darkness settled over the lake. Grace wrapped her cardigan more tightly around herself. "So what happens now?" I smiled faintly. "Now I go home and call Richard, ask him to meet me tomorrow, and tell him my decision." That night, in the master bedroom of the lake house, the room Richard and I had shared for so many summers, I slept more peacefully than I had in months. By morning, I felt certain of my path forward. The drive back to Oak Ridge with Grace was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. She dropped me at my house with a tight hug and a whispered, "Call me later." Inside, the house felt different somehow. Still mine, but no longer defined by the absence of Richard. I'd redecorated in small ways over the months, replacing the heavy leather sofa he'd preferred with a lighter, more comfortable sectional, painting the dining room the sage green he'd always vetoed, hanging artwork I'd purchased during my travels. I called Richard immediately. "Can you come over tomorrow evening, around 7? "Of course," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself," I said. "We have a lot to talk about." That evening, I prepared for our conversation by reviewing the journey of the past 6 months. Not just the practical changes in my life, but the emotional evolution I'd undergone. I'd moved from shock to anger to grief, finally arriving at a place of clarity I hadn't expected to find. When Richard arrived the following evening, punctual as always, I was waiting in the sunroom, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses set on the small table between the chairs. He looked good. The initial haggardness that had followed our separation had given way to a healthier appearance. He'd lost weight, his clothes more stylish than the conservative business attire he'd favored for decades. "Thank you for coming," I said, gesturing for him to sit. "Thank you for inviting me." He settled into the chair opposite mine, his posture tense despite his attempt at a relaxed smile. "You look wonderful, Vicky." "Thank you." I poured wine for both of us, then set the bottle aside. "I've made a decision about our future." Richard nodded, taking a careful breath. "I'm ready to hear it, whatever you've decided." I studied him for a moment. This man I'd loved for most of my adult life, who had hurt me deeply, yet who remained intertwined with my sense of self in ways I couldn't fully untangle. "I don't want a divorce," I said simply. Relief flooded his expression, followed quickly by cautious hope. "You don't?" "No. But I don't want to simply resume our marriage as it was, either." I leaned forward slightly. "These past 6 months have shown me that I'm capable of living independently, of making my own choices. I'm not willing to give that up. I wouldn't ask you to, he said quickly. What I'm proposing is a new kind of partnership, I continued. One based on complete honesty, mutual respect, and the understanding that we are two whole people choosing to be together, not two halves desperately clinging to each other. Richard nodded slowly. What would that look like, practically speaking? I want to keep this house as my primary residence, I said. You can move back in if you'd like. But I also want to maintain the freedom to travel when I choose, to pursue my own interests, to make decisions without always needing to consult you first. And what about me? Would I have the same freedom? Yes, I said firmly. That's exactly the point. We each maintain our independence while choosing to share our lives. The difference is that now, that sharing would include complete transparency. No more secrets, no more compartmentalized lives. Richard was quiet for a moment, absorbing my words. This isn't what I expected, he admitted finally. No? He shook his head. I thought you'd either want a divorce or a return to the way things were before. A small, rueful smile crossed his face. I should have known better. You've never been more yourself than you've been these past months. The observation warmed me. He had been paying attention to my evolution. There's something else, I added. I want us to see a marriage counselor, not just for a few sessions, but for as long as it takes to rebuild the trust that was broken, to learn how to communicate in ways we obviously never mastered in 40 years together. Richard nodded without hesitation. I agree, completely. He set his wine glass down, leaning forward with an earnest expression. Victoria, I want you to know that I understand what a gift you're offering me. A second chance I don't deserve. I promise you, I won't waste it. Don't make promises, I said gently. Just show me, day by day, that you're committed to this new version of us. That's all I ask. Later that evening, after Richard had left with plans to begin moving back in the following weekend, I called Grace as promised. Well, she demanded without preamble, what did you decide? I'm giving our marriage another chance, I told her, but on my terms this time. And what does Richard think of your terms? He's grateful for any chance at all, I said simply. And I think he genuinely understands why things need to be different going forward. Grace was quiet for a moment. Are you sure about this, Vicky? Really sure? Yes, I said, surprised by how confident I felt. Not because I can't live without him, these months have proven I can. But because, having found myself again, I've discovered I still want to share my life with him. The difference is that now it's a choice, not a dependency. Well then, Grace said warmly, I'm happy for you, for both of you. After we hung up, I sat in my sunroom, my favorite space in the house, and watched the stars appear in the darkening sky. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. But for the first time in months, I felt hopeful about our future. Not the future I'd once envisioned, but something potentially stronger, more authentic. The following weekend, Richard moved back in with minimal fanfare. He brought only his clothes and personal items, leaving behind the furniture he'd purchased for his apartment. I want this to feel like a fresh start, he explained. Not like I'm just slotting back into my old life. We established new routines, cooking together rather than me handling all the meals as I once had, dividing household responsibilities more equitably, setting aside time each week for honest conversations about our feelings and expectations. Our first session with Dr. Elaine Harper, a marriage counselor specializing in long-term relationships, was both challenging and illuminating. What are your goals for therapy? She asked, looking between us. To rebuild trust, I said immediately. To learn how to be truly intimate, Richard added. Not just physically, but emotionally. To stop hiding behind roles and really see each other. Dr. Harper nodded. Both excellent goals. But I should warn you, this process will require facing uncomfortable truths about yourselves and your relationship. Are you prepared for that? We exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. Good, she said. Then let's begin by examining the patterns that allowed such significant secrets to exist within your marriage for so long. That first session was painful, exposing the dysfunctional dynamics we'd established early in our relationship. My tendency to accommodate rather than confront. Richard's habit of compartmentalizing difficult emotions. Our shared commitment to maintaining appearances at all costs. You've both been performing rather than participating in your marriage, Dr. Harper observed. Victoria as the perfect supportive wife, Richard as the successful provider and family man. Those roles served a purpose, but they also created the perfect environment for secrets to flourish. Her words stung with their accuracy. Over the weeks that followed, we continued our sessions while also implementing small but significant changes at home. We established a weekly date night, trying new restaurants or activities rather than falling back on old favorites. We read books together, discussing them over morning coffee. We shared dreams and fears we'd previously kept to ourselves. The physical aspect of our relationship evolved as well. After months apart, we approached intimacy cautiously, almost shyly, like new lovers rather than a couple with 4 decades of shared history. There was a vulnerability to our reconnection that felt both foreign and precious. 3 months after Richard moved back in, we hosted our first family dinner with Jessica, Mark, and their spouses. The evening was tentative, conversations sometimes stilted, but by dessert, a semblance of normality had returned. Mark debating politics with his father, Jessica sharing stories from work, Daniel and Olivia contributing anecdotes about their respective days. As I carried plates to the kitchen, afterward Jessica followed me. "Are you happy, Mom?" she asked directly. "Really happy, not just making the best of things?" I set the dishes in the sink and turned to face my daughter. "Yes," I said simply. "Not in the same way I thought I was before. This is different, more authentic." She studied me for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied by what she saw in my expression. "Good. That's all that matters to me." The next significant milestone came when Richard suggested we invite Nathan and his family for dinner. "Only if you're comfortable with it," he added quickly. But I thought, it might be good for all of us to be together, as a family. The suggestion would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Now, it felt like a natural progression. "I think that's a wonderful idea," I said. The evening of that dinner, I found myself experiencing an unexpected sense of anticipation. I'd met Nathan several times by then, and his wife Claire once or twice. Their daughter Lily was a charming 3-year-old with Richard's eyes and Claire's curly hair. But this would be the first time they'd be in our home, the home Richard and I had shared for decades while Nathan remained a secret. "Are you nervous?" Richard asked, finding me in the kitchen arranging a cheese platter. "A little," I admitted. "But not in the way you might think. I'm more worried about making them feel welcome, about making sure Lily is comfortable." Richard's expression softened. "You're remarkable, you know that? After everything, you're still thinking about making others feel at ease." I smiled but shook my head slightly. Not remarkable, just trying to move forward rather than looking back. The dinner itself went more smoothly than I could have hoped. Nathan and Claire arrived with flowers and a bottle of wine, Lily clutching a drawing she'd made for Grandma Vicky. The simple title brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, kneeling to accept the colorful scribble. "This is beautiful. I'm going to hang it right on the refrigerator." Lily beamed, then turned to Richard. "I made one for Grandpa, too." As we sat around the dining table later, Richard and I, Nathan and Claire, Mark and Olivia, Jessica and Daniel, I found myself studying the faces of these people connected by blood, choice, and circumstance. An unconventional family, certainly, but a family nonetheless. "A toast," Richard said, raising his glass, "to new beginnings, and to the wisdom that comes from facing difficult truths." We all raised our glasses, the moment solemn yet hopeful. Later that night, after our guests had departed and Richard and I were preparing for bed, he turned to me with an expression of quiet wonder. "I never imagined this could be possible," he said softly. "All of us together, not just tolerating each other, but genuinely connecting. It's more than I deserve." I approached him, taking his hands in mine. "It's not about what any of us deserve, Richard. It's about choosing to create something meaningful from the pieces of what was broken." He pulled me gently into his arms, holding me close. "I love you, Victoria. More now, I think, than I ever did before. Because now I see you, really see you, for the extraordinary woman you are." I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you too," I replied. "Not despite our past, but including it. All of it." 1 year after discovering Richard's secret son, we renewed our vows in a simple ceremony at the lake house. Not the elaborate celebration of our 40th anniversary, but something more intimate and authentic. Just our immediate family, including Nathan, Claire, and Lily, now a big sister to 4-month-old James. Grace stood beside me as my matron of honor, just as she had at our original wedding 41 years earlier. "You look radiant," she whispered as we waited for the informal ceremony to begin. I smiled, smoothing the skirt of my simple ivory dress. Not a traditional wedding gown, but something elegant and age-appropriate I'd chosen specifically for this day. "I feel at peace," I told her, "like I've finally found solid ground after months of uncertainty." Grace squeezed my hand. "That's better than happiness sometimes. More lasting." The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Richard and I had written our own vows, promising not a lifetime of perfect harmony, but a commitment to honesty, respect, and continuous growth together. "I choose you again, Victoria," Richard said, his voice steady as he slipped a new ring onto my finger, not a replacement for my original wedding band, which I still wore, but a companion piece symbolizing this new chapter. Not as the young man who didn't understand the meaning of partnership, but as someone who has learned through loss what it means to truly share a life with another person. When it was my turn, I took his hand in mine. "I choose you again, Richard. Not as the woman who built her identity around being your wife, but as someone who knows herself fully and still wants you by her side. I promise to love you authentically, to speak my truth even when it's difficult, and to continue discovering who we can be together." Afterward, as our family celebrated around us, I found myself drawn to the edge of the lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. Richard joined me, slipping his arm around my waist. "Happy?" he asked softly. I considered the question seriously. "Yes," I said finally. "But it's a different kind of happiness than I knew before. More grounded, more real." He nodded in understanding. "I know exactly what you mean." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. Eventually, Jessica called us back to cut the small cake that had been prepared for the occasion. As we rejoined our family, I caught sight of Nathan showing his daughter how to skip stones across the water's surface, Mark laughing at something Claire had said, Jessica cradling baby James with a look of pure adoration. This wasn't the family I'd imagined all those years ago when Richard and I first exchanged vows. It was messier, more complicated, shaped by mistakes and secrets as much as by love and commitment. But it was real in a way my carefully constructed vision of perfection had never been. As Richard and I cut the cake together, our family applauding around us, I realized that what had initially seemed like the end of everything had actually been a beginning. The discovery of Nathan's existence had shattered the false perfection of our marriage. But from those broken pieces, we'd created something stronger, more honest, more capable of withstanding life's inevitable challenges. That evening, after everyone had gone and Richard and I were alone in the lake house, we sat on the deck watching stars appear in the darkening sky, my head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around me. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about what you said when we first started seeing Dr. Harper, about how love without honesty isn't really love at all." "I remember," I murmured. "You were right. But I've realized something else too." He turned slightly to look at me directly. "Honesty without forgiveness can't lead to healing. Thank you for finding a way to forgive me, Vicky, for giving us this second chance." I reached up to touch his face gently. "Forgiveness wasn't something I gave you, Richard. It was something I gave myself. Permission to love you again despite everything. Permission to build a new life that acknowledges the past without being imprisoned by it." He covered my hand with his, turning to press a kiss against my palm. "However it came about, I'm grateful." Later, lying beside him in the darkness of the bedroom where so much had changed a year before, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. From the shock of discovery to the pain of separation, from the struggle to redefine myself to the cautious rebuilding of trust, every step had been necessary to arrive at this new understanding of what it meant to truly love another person. At 63, I had learned what had eluded me for decades, that real love exists not in perfection, but in acceptance of our complete selves, flaws and failures included. That partnership means standing as equals, each whole in their own right, choosing daily to share their journey. Richard's breathing had deepened beside me, his hand still holding mine even in sleep. Tomorrow we would return to Oak Ridge, to the life we were continuing to build together. Nathan and his family would visit again soon. Jessica was talking about relocating back to the area with Daniel and their children. Mark and Olivia were discussing starting a family of their own. Life would continue to unfold in ways I couldn't predict, with challenges I couldn't foresee. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I had discovered my own strength, my capacity for resilience and forgiveness. I had learned that endings can become beginnings, that betrayal can lead to authenticity, that what appears broken beyond repair can be transformed into something new and beautiful. As sleep began to claim me, I held that knowledge close, a hard-won wisdom that would guide whatever came next in this unexpected story that was still being written, one honest day at a time. 2 years after renewing our vows, Richard and I settled into what I now think of as our second marriage, different from the first in all the ways that matter most. The rhythm of our life together had shifted, becoming more deliberate, more conscious. No longer operating on the automatic patterns established decades ago, we now made choices daily about how we wanted to exist together as partners. Our weekly sessions with Dr. Harper had evolved from crisis management to thoughtful discussions about communication and emotional intimacy. She often remarked on how far we'd come. "Many couples never recover from betrayal of this magnitude," she observed, during one of our monthly check-ins. "What do you think has made the difference for you two?" Richard and I exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between us. "Time," I offered, "giving ourselves permission to heal at our own pace." "Commitment to complete honesty," Richard added, "even when it's uncomfortable." Dr. Harper nodded. "Those are certainly important factors, but I'd suggest there's something else at work here. Something less tangible, but equally crucial." "What's that?" I asked. "You both allowed yourselves to be transformed by the experience," she said simply. "Instead of trying to repair what was broken, you built something entirely new from the pieces." Her observation lingered with me long after that session ended. It was true. We hadn't merely patched the cracks in our marriage. We'd created a different relationship altogether, one founded on a deeper understanding of ourselves and each other. On a crisp autumn morning shortly after that conversation, I sat in my sunroom with my first cup of coffee, watching golden light filter through the changing leaves of our maple tree. Richard had left early for his regular breakfast with Nathan, a monthly tradition they'd established that had gradually extended to include Mark as well. The slow, careful building of relationships between my husband's sons had been one of the unexpected gifts of these past 2 years. It hadn't been smooth or immediate. Mark's sense of betrayal ran deep, his resentment of Nathan initially palpable. But over time, shared interests and Richard's gentle persistence had created a tentative bridge between them. Now they met regularly without Richard's mediation. Nathan consulting Mark on architectural elements for his landscape designs, Mark inviting Nathan's family to holiday gatherings. Not quite brothers in the traditional sense, but connected by more than just biology. The sound of the front door opening interrupted my thoughts. "Vicky?" Richard called. "Are you home?" "In the sunroom," I replied, surprised. "You're back early." He appeared in the doorway, a curious mix of excitement and nervousness on his face. "I want to show you something." I set my coffee aside. "What is it?" Instead of answering, he held out his hand. "Come with me?" Intrigued, I allowed him to lead me outside to his car. As we drove through town and toward the outskirts of Oak Ridge, my curiosity deepened. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" I asked, watching familiar landmarks give way to more rural surroundings. "It's a surprise," Richard said. Hint of boyish enthusiasm in his voice that reminded me of the younger man I'd fallen in love with decades ago. 20 minutes later, he turned onto a winding gravel road bordered by tall pines and flowering dogwoods. After about half a mile, the trees opened to reveal a charming cottage overlooking a small, pristine lake I'd never seen before. "Richard, what is this place?" I asked as he parked in front of the cottage. He turned to me, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "It could be ours if you like it." "Ours?" I repeated, confused. "We already have a home." "I know," he said quickly, "and I'm not suggesting we sell it. But I've been thinking. You mentioned wanting a place where the whole family could gather, somewhere neutral that doesn't carry the history of our house or the lake house." He was right. I had mentioned it months ago during a conversation about holiday plans. The idea of creating new traditions in a space unmarked by past secrets and revelations had appealed to me. "Come see inside," Richard urged gently. The cottage was simple but charming, an open-concept main floor with a stone fireplace, kitchen with large windows overlooking the lake, 3 bedrooms upstairs, and a finished basement that could serve as additional sleeping space or a play area for grandchildren. The previous owners were an older couple who used it mainly in summer, Richard explained as we walked through the light-filled rooms. But it's fully winterized, has a new roof, updated plumbing, everything's in good shape. I moved to the back deck, taking in the stunning view of the lake, glassy and still in the morning light. "It's beautiful," I admitted. "But Richard, this is a significant decision. A second property is a major commitment." He joined me on the deck, leaning against the railing beside me. "I know, and if you don't want it, that's completely fine. But I wanted you to see it before someone else snapped it up." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "There's something else I should tell you." I turned to face him fully. "What is it?" "I consulted with Jessica and Mark before bringing you here, and Nathan too." He hesitated. "I wanted to make sure everyone would feel comfortable with this being a family gathering place." The careful consideration touched me deeply. 2 years ago, Richard would have made this decision unilaterally, presenting it as a fait accompli rather than a possibility to be explored together. "And what did they think?" I asked, A smile spread across his face. They loved the idea. Jessica already has ideas for the kitchen. Apparently, Daniel needs a proper space for his cooking experiments. Mark talked about building a dock next spring. And Nathan? He paused. Nathan offered to design the landscaping as a gift to us. I felt a sudden, unexpected swell of emotion. This place represented something I hadn't realized I wanted. Until this moment. A fresh start. A neutral ground where our blended, complicated family could create new memories untainted by the past. I'm not asking for an answer today, Richard added quickly. Take some time to think about it. We can come back, visit in different weather, make sure it feels right. I nodded, still absorbing the possibility. Thank you for finding this, for thinking of it. He took my hand, squeezing it gently. Whatever you decide is fine. I just wanted you to see the possibility. As we drove home, I found myself already imagining summer barbecues on that deck, Thanksgiving gatherings around, a large table, winter evenings with grandchildren building puzzles by the fireplace, a place of new beginnings, of chosen connections rather than obligatory ones. Let's do it, I said suddenly, the words surprising even me. Richard glanced over, eyebrows raised. You're sure? You don't need more time to think? I shook my head, a certainty settling over me. No, it feels right. A new chapter for all of us. His smile was brilliant, genuine joy lighting his features. I was hoping you'd say that. 2 months later, on a snowy December afternoon, we gathered at the cottage, newly ours, for our first family Christmas celebration in the new space. Jessica and Daniel arrived first with their 2 children, followed shortly by Mark and Olivia, who had announced just weeks earlier that they were expecting their first child in summer. Nathan, Claire, and their children came last, their car, filled with gifts, and Claire's famous homemade cinnamon rolls. As they unloaded their things, I watched from the kitchen window, struck by how natural it felt to see them all together. This patchwork family created from secrets and revelations, now finding its way toward genuine connection. Need help with anything? Richard asked, coming to stand beside me. I leaned against him slightly. No, just taking it all in. He followed my gaze to the scene outside. Our children, their spouses, our grandchildren, all laughing as they navigated the snowy path to the front door. It's something, isn't it? Not what we planned, but better in some ways, I finished for him. More authentic. He pressed a kiss to my temple. Exactly. The weekend unfolded in a blur of activity. Meals prepared together in the spacious kitchen, board games by the fireplace, walks around the frozen lake, impromptu dance parties instigated by the grandchildren. On Christmas Eve, as we all gathered for dinner at the long table Richard and Mark had built specifically for the cottage, I found myself overwhelmed by a sense of gratitude so profound it momentarily took my breath away. Looking around at these faces, some connected by blood, others by choice, all now part of a family constellation I couldn't have imagined 3 years earlier, I realized that the betrayal that had nearly destroyed us had, ironically, created the opportunity for something more genuine to emerge. Later that night, after the younger children had been tucked into bed with promises that Santa would find them even at the new cottage, the adults gathered in the living room with glasses of wine and Richard's famous hot chocolate. Conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional good-natured disagreement. Mom, Jessica said suddenly during a lull in the conversation, I've been meaning to ask you something. I turned to my daughter, curious. What is it, sweetheart? She glanced at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly. We've been thinking. We'd like to move back to Oak Ridge permanently. Daniel's been offered a position at the culinary school, and with the kids getting older, we want them to grow up closer to family. Joy blossomed in my chest. That would be wonderful, but what about your job? The gallery in Seattle? Jessica smiled. That's the other part of the news. I've been offered a position as director of the Art Center in Oak Ridge. They want to expand their exhibition program, develop more community outreach. That's perfect for you, I said warmly, already, imagining having my daughter and grandchildren nearby after years of visits limited by distance. There's more, Jessica continued, a slight hesitation in her voice. She glanced toward Nathan, who nodded slightly. Nathan and I have been talking about a collaboration, a gallery space within the art center focused on the intersection of art and nature, combining my curatorial experience with his landscape design principles. I looked between them, these two talented individuals connected by circumstances beyond their control, now choosing to build something meaningful together. That sounds incredible, I said sincerely. Both of you would bring such unique perspectives to a project like that. It was Nathan's idea, actually, Jessica admitted, after he saw my portfolio during Thanksgiving. Nathan shrugged modestly. Jessica's work deserves a wider audience, and I've been wanting to explore more artistic elements in my designs. It seemed like a natural collaboration. As the conversation continued, plans and possibilities expanding with each contribution, I caught Richard's eye across the room. The quiet pride and wonder in his expression mirrored my own feelings. Astonishment at how this fragmented family had, against all odds, begun to forge genuine connections. Later, after everyone had retired to their rooms and the cottage had fallen silent except for the occasional pop from the dying fire, Richard and I sat together on the window seat overlooking the moonlit lake. "Did you ever imagine this?" I asked softly, gesturing to encompass the sleeping house full of our blended family. 3 years ago, when everything fell apart? Richard shook his head. Never. I was just hoping you might eventually forgive me enough to remain in my life in some capacity. This? He paused, emotion thickening his voice. This feels like more than I deserve. I turned to face him fully. It's not about deserving, Richard. It's about choosing, every day, to create something meaningful from what we've been given, even the painful parts. He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that had become more precious since nearly being lost. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For your courage, for your willingness to rebuild rather than simply walk away, for showing our children what real strength looks like." I smiled, recognizing the truth in his words not as flattery, but as an honest acknowledgement of the journey we'd traveled together. "We should get some sleep," I said finally. "Tomorrow will be chaos once the grandchildren realize Santa has arrived." As predicted, the following morning erupted in joyful mayhem as soon as the first child awoke. Within minutes, the living room was a whirlwind of torn wrapping paper, excited exclamations, and adults trying to document every moment with cameras and phones. Amid the commotion, I found myself sitting on the floor with Lily, now 5, helping her assemble a complex building set she'd received. Nathan's daughter had attached herself to me almost immediately upon meeting 2 years earlier, somehow intuiting the special place she might hold in my life if given the chance. "Grandma Vicky," she said thoughtfully as we clicked pieces together, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." She tilted her head, regarding me with Richard's eyes in her young face. "Why do some people have 2 grandmas and some people have 3? My friend Emily only has 1 grandma, but I have 3. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Families come in all different shapes and sizes, Lily. Some are formed when people get married and have children, like your mom and dad. Others come together in different ways, sometimes later in life." She considered this seriously. "Like how I didn't meet you until I was already big." "Exactly like that," I agreed, marveling at her simple acceptance of our complicated family structure. She nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned her attention to the construction project. "I'm glad you're my grandma now," she said matter-of-factly. "You're really good at building things." The innocent comment brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but from the profound realization that children often understand essential truths more easily than adults. Yes, I was good at building things, not just plastic construction sets, but bridges between past and present, connections across divides that had once seemed unbridgeable. The remainder of the holiday passed in a blur of shared meals, outdoor, adventures in the snow, and quiet moments of connection. On our final evening together, Richard proposed a toast before dinner, looking around the table at the faces of our expanded family. 3 years ago, he began, his voice steady but emotional. I never could have imagined us all together like this. My mistakes, my secrets, nearly cost me everything that mattered. He paused, his gaze finding mine. But through Victoria's extraordinary capacity for forgiveness and everyone's willingness to build something new, we've created this, a family defined not by perfection but by authenticity. He raised his glass higher, to second chances, to new beginnings, and to the courage it takes to face difficult truths. To family, Nathan added quietly, raising his own glass. To family, everyone echoed, the simple word encompassing the complex reality we had all chosen to embrace. As winter gave way to spring, the cottage became the centerpiece of our family gatherings. Easter celebrations with an elaborate egg hunt designed by Nathan around the property. Memorial Day weekends with barbecues on the newly built deck. Summer, swimming in the lake where Richard taught the grandchildren to fish from the dock Mark had constructed. Jessica and Daniel found a charming house in Oak Ridge just 10 minutes from our home, and their collaborative project with Nathan at the Art Center quickly became a respected venue for emerging artists in the region. Mark and Olivia welcomed their daughter in June, naming her Grace, after my steadfast friend who had supported me through the darkest days of discovery and separation. Life settled into new patterns, not perfect, but rich with genuine connection. Richard and I continued our monthly sessions with Dr. Harper, not because our marriage was in crisis, but because we valued the space to reflect on our journey and continue growing together. You know, Dr. Harper remarked during one session as, "We approach the 3rd anniversary of my discovery. What you've accomplished is quite remarkable. Many couples never recover from betrayal of this magnitude." "We almost didn't," I acknowledged. "There were moments when walking away seemed like the only possible response." "What made the difference, do you think?" she asked, though I suspected she already knew the answer. Richard and I exchanged glances, a wealth of shared understanding passing between us. "Choosing transformation over mere repair," I said finally, recognizing that we couldn't go back to what was, but we could move forward to something new. And realizing that forgiveness isn't a single act, but a daily choice, Richard added. One that has to be earned through consistent honesty and respect. Dr. Harper nodded, satisfaction in her expression. "Those are hard-won insights, ones that will serve you well in whatever challenges lie ahead." On the 3rd anniversary of the day I found that fateful envelope, Richard and I returned to Cedar Lake, to the dock where our 40th anniversary celebration had unraveled into revelation and pain. The spring day was perfect. Clear blue skies, gentle breeze, the lake's surface glittering with sunlight. "Why did you want to come back here today?" Richard asked as we stood side by side, looking out over the water. "Wouldn't it be better to let this date pass unmarked?" I shook my head. "I don't want to pretend it never happened, Richard. That day changed everything, in ways that were painful, yes, but ultimately transformative." He nodded slowly. "I understand, though I still wish I could undo the hurt I caused you." "If you could go back and change things," I asked, genuinely curious, "what would you do differently?" He considered the question carefully. "I would have told you about Nathan, from the beginning, of course, but beyond that." He paused, thoughtful. "I would have worked harder to be truly present in our marriage, To share my whole self with you, rather than presenting only the parts I thought you wanted to see. And I would have asked deeper questions, I said. Challenged the easy answers. Made space for difficult truths rather than clinging to comfortable illusions. We stood in companionable silence for a while, each absorbed in our own reflections on the journey that had brought us to this moment. I have something for you, Richard said finally, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box, offering it to me with a slightly nervous smile. Inside was a delicate silver pendant, a tree of life design, its branches spreading into an intricate pattern of silver wire and tiny gemstones. It's beautiful, I said softly, lifting it from the box. What are the stones? Birthstones, Richard explained. One for each member of our family, you and me, Jessica and Daniel, their children, Mark and Olivia and baby Grace, Nathan and Claire and their children. All of us, connected. Tears welled in my eyes as I turned the pendant, watching sunlight catch the various colors, sapphire, emerald, diamond, ruby, amethyst, each representing someone now woven into the fabric of our shared life. Will you help me put it on? I asked, handing him the necklace and turning around. His fingers were gentle as he fastened the clasp at the nape of my neck, the pendant settling against my skin like a promise. Perfect, he murmured, his hands coming to rest lightly on my shoulders. I turned to face him, taking both his hands in mine. 3 years ago, standing in this exact spot, I thought my life as I knew it was over. It was, he said quietly. For both of us. I nodded. Yes. But what I couldn't see then was that endings can also be beginnings. That sometimes, what looks like destruction is actually transformation in disguise. Richard squeezed my hands gently. I love you, Victoria. More authentically, more completely than I ever knew was possible. I love you too, I replied, the words carrying the weight of our shared journey, the pain and the healing, the breaking and the rebuilding. All of you. The man I married 43 years ago, the man who broke my heart, and the man standing before me now who had the courage to face his mistakes and grow from them. As we walked back to the car hand in hand, I touched the pendant at my throat, feeling the smooth contours of the silver tree with its branching connections. It was a fitting symbol for what we had created from the wreckage of secrets and lies. Not a perfect family, not an unblemished marriage, but something real and living, continually growing in new and unexpected directions. That evening, as we prepared dinner together in our kitchen, another change from our previous pattern where cooking had been primarily my domain, I found myself filled with a quiet contentment that went deeper than the happiness I'd once thought was enough. What are you thinking about? Richard asked, noticing my contemplative expression as I chopped vegetables. I smiled, considering how to articulate the complexity of my feelings. I was thinking that I'm grateful. For what specifically? For everything that brought us here, even the painful parts. I set down my knife, turning to face him fully. 3 years ago, I would have said that discovering your secret son was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Now I see it differently. How so? He asked, his expression curious. It wasn't the secret itself that was destroying us, Richard. It was the fact that we had created a marriage where secrets could exist, where performance mattered more than authenticity, where maintaining the appearance of perfection was more important than facing difficult truths. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. So, when the secret came to light, it forced us to confront the fundamental flaws in how we related to each other, I finished, and gave us the opportunity to build something stronger in its place. Richard set aside the wine he'd been opening and crossed the kitchen to stand before me. You are the wisest person I know, Victoria Reynolds, he said softly, cradling my face in his hands. And I am the luckiest man alive to be given the chance to truly know you, after all these years. As his lips met mine in a kiss, both familiar, and somehow knew I felt the truth of our journey settle into my bones. We had been broken open, yes, but only to reveal the possibility of a more authentic wholeness, a connection deeper and truer than anything we had known before. And in that knowledge was a peace I hadn't believed possible when I first held that manila envelope in trembling hands 3 years before. The peace that comes from embracing life in all its messy, imperfect glory and choosing to build something beautiful from whatever materials we are given. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.